The woman was already walking away when I realized I had just given a complete stranger the last $18 I had in the world. I had no food waiting for me at home, no money hidden in my wallet, and no idea how I was going to get through the next few days. Yet when she looked at me with trembling hands and tears filling her eyes, something inside me made the decision before my mind could stop it. She pressed her palm against her chest, stared at me as though she had just been handed something far more valuable than money, and whispered, "I'll come back for you, I promise." I thought those were simply the desperate words of a stranger I would never see again. I had no idea that promise would eventually change both of our lives. But before we continue, if you believe that kindness still matters, that forgiveness can heal what pride destroys, and that hope can find us even when we have nothing left, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to our channel so our community can keep sharing stories about compassion, second chances, and the unexpected people who change our lives. My name is Everett Hayes, and at 37 years old, I had become very good at pretending everything was fine. I lived in a small rented apartment above a hardware store in a quiet Midwestern town, worked repairing old heating systems, and had learned how to stretch a dollar so far that sometimes I forgot what it felt like not to worry about money. 3 months earlier, the company I had worked for since I was 26 had closed after losing a major contract. I had spent years believing loyalty would protect me, but the world had taught me otherwise. My savings disappeared quickly while I searched for another job. First came the rent. Then the utility bills. Then the repairs on my aging truck. By the beginning of that particular Thursday, I had exactly $18.42 in my checking account, and $13 in cash. The $18 were all that stood between me and a completely empty account, but I was still carrying those $18 because I had promised myself I would buy something to eat before going home. I had spent the morning filling out applications at a public library because I could no longer afford to waste gasoline driving from business to business. Around noon, I walked to a small grocery store near the bus station, hoping to find something cheap enough to last more than one meal. I was standing near the entrance, counting coins in my palm, when I noticed a woman sitting on a bench outside. She looked to be in her early 30s. Her brown coat was clean but worn at the sleeves, her auburn hair was pulled loosely behind her head, and she was holding a small paper envelope so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Beside her sat a little canvas bag. She wasn't crying. Somehow, that made her look more broken. She was staring at the bus schedule as though she were trying to solve a problem that had no answer. I walked past her at first. I told myself everyone had problems. I had problems. She could have been waiting for someone. She could have been perfectly capable of taking care of herself. But after a few steps, I heard the faint sound of paper tearing. I turned around and saw her staring at the pieces of a prescription receipt in her hands. Her shoulders shook once, and she quickly wiped her face. There was something about that small attempt to hide her tears that stopped me. I approached her carefully and asked if she was all right. She immediately said yes, then apologized for lying. Her name was Marin, and she explained that she had been trying to get home to a town nearly 40 miles away. Her younger brother had been waiting for her there, she told me, and she had promised she would return that afternoon. She had traveled to our town because she had been offered temporary work at a restaurant, but the manager had cancelled the position when she arrived. She had spent the little money she had on the bus ticket to get there and had been counting on the restaurant paying her for the first day. When that fell through, she had no money left for the return trip. Her brother was recovering from an accident, she explained, and she didn't want him to worry. She had tried calling several people, but nobody answered. The envelope in her hand contained the last prescription her brother needed, and she was terrified that she wouldn't make it home before the pharmacy closed. I listened without knowing what to say. I wanted to help, but my own situation seemed almost laughable in comparison. I had $18. The bus ticket cost $17.80. I could buy her the ticket, but that would leave me with nothing. Not a few dollars. Not enough for a sandwich. Nothing. For several seconds, I stared at the bus station doors. Then I looked at Marin. She wasn't asking me for money. In fact, she seemed embarrassed that I had heard her story. She thanked me for listening and said she would figure something out. She stood up, lifted her canvas bag, and began walking toward the station entrance. I reached into my pocket and felt the folded bills I had been saving. I thought about the empty refrigerator in my apartment. I thought about the job applications I still needed to submit. I thought about the fact that nobody was coming to rescue me either. Then I called her back. I handed her the $18. She stared at my palm and didn't move. When I told her to take it, she shook her head and said she couldn't. I told her that I would figure out my own situation, even though I had absolutely no idea how. She finally accepted the money with both hands. Her eyes filled with tears so quickly that she had to look away. Then she reached for my hand, squeezed it, and promised she would come back for me. I smiled because I thought she meant she would repay the money someday. I told her she didn't owe me anything. She shook her head and said she wasn't talking about the money. Then she hurried toward the bus. I stood there until the bus disappeared around the corner. That afternoon, I walked home instead of taking the bus because I couldn't justify spending even the small amount of cash in my pocket. By the time I reached my apartment, my legs were aching and my stomach was empty. I opened my refrigerator and found half a bottle of water, some mustard, and a lonely apple that had been sitting in the drawer for several days. I ate the apple slowly and laughed at myself because it seemed ridiculous to feel proud about being hungry. Still, I slept better that afternoon than I had in weeks. Maybe because, for once, my problems hadn't been the most important thing in my life. The next morning, I woke up to find a notice slipped under my door. My landlord had given me 5 days to pay the remaining rent or move out. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the paper. For the first time, fear became heavier than embarrassment. I called 3 employers. 2 rejected me. 1 never answered. By noon, I had walked nearly 6 miles looking for work. At a small repair shop on the edge of town, an older owner named Graham Mercer listened to my experience and offered me a trial shift the following Monday. It wasn't much, but it was something. I walked home feeling hopeful for the first time in months. Then I found my truck wouldn't start. I sat behind the wheel, turned the key again, and heard nothing but a weak click. I lowered my forehead onto the steering wheel. It felt like the universe was testing exactly how much disappointment one person could absorb without breaking. I didn't know that while I was sitting there, Marin was already on her way back. She arrived the following Monday. I was at Graham's repair shop, covered in grease and trying to prove I was worth hiring permanently, when a woman walked through the open garage entrance carrying a small brown envelope. At first I didn't recognize her. Then she smiled, and I froze. Marin. She had kept her promise. She looked different. Not because her clothes had changed, but because the fear in her face was gone. She walked toward me and placed the envelope on the workbench. Inside was the $18, folded neatly, along with a note. I told her she didn't need to return it. She smiled and said she knew. Then she explained that she hadn't come back simply to repay me. She had spent the previous few days trying to understand why a stranger would give away his last money when he clearly needed it himself. Her brother, Calvin, had received his medicine because of me. But something else had happened too. On the ride home, Marin had realized she had been living for months believing that asking for help made her weak. She had been too proud to tell anyone how badly she was struggling. My $18 hadn't simply bought a bus ticket. They had reminded her that needing someone didn't make her worthless. Then she told me something I hadn't expected. She had found temporary work at a community center near her hometown. The director had heard what happened at the bus station and offered her a position helping families who were struggling with transportation, food, and employment. Marin had accepted. She said she wanted to help people because someone had helped her when she had nothing left. I felt embarrassed when she asked how I was doing. I told her about the landlord, the truck, the job, and the fear that I might still lose my apartment. I expected sympathy. Instead, she became determined. Marin called the community center director. She contacted a local transportation charity. She found a mechanic willing to inspect my truck at a reduced price. She even spoke with Graham, who had already decided to hire me after seeing my work ethic. None of it felt like charity. It felt like someone had finally reminded me that I was not invisible. Weeks passed. I kept working at Graham's shop. My truck was repaired. I caught up on rent slowly. Marin and I began talking regularly, not because either of us needed something from the other, but because we had discovered a strange kind of friendship built on honesty. I eventually learned the truth behind her desperation that day. Marin's brother had been seriously injured in a workplace accident. Their parents had died years earlier, and she had become his primary support. She had been working 2 jobs, caring for him, and pretending she could handle everything. The restaurant job had been her attempt to earn enough money to stop falling behind. But there was another secret she had kept from me. The day I gave her the $18, she had been considering leaving town permanently. She had planned to abandon her responsibilities because she believed she was failing everyone. That bus ride home changed her mind. Months later, Marin and I stood outside the same grocery store where we had first met. It was a bright afternoon, and the bench was still there. She sat down and looked at the spot where she had once been waiting for a bus with nothing but fear in her hands. She told me she still had the receipt from that ticket. I laughed and asked why. She said because it reminded her of the exact moment her life changed direction. Then she handed me something. It was the same $18. Not the same physical bills, of course. They had been exchanged and spent long ago. These were new bills, carefully folded, placed inside a small frame with a handwritten message beneath them. It said that $18 had once been the last thing I owned, but because I gave it away, it became the first thing that belonged to both of us, hope. I couldn't speak. Marin smiled through tears and told me she had started a small emergency fund at the community center. Every month, people donated whatever they could. $5. $10. Sometimes 50 cents. They called it the Last Dollar Fund, because nobody was required to give more than they could afford. The purpose was simple: when someone reached the point where they had nowhere else to turn, the fund would help them take one more step. She wanted me to be the first person whose name was written in its history. I told her she didn't have to do that. She said she did. Because I had once given her my last $18, and she wanted to spend the rest of her life making sure someone else didn't have to face their hardest moment completely alone. That was when I finally understood what she had meant when she promised to come back for me. She hadn't meant she would return with money. She had meant she would return with the kindness I had given her. And sometimes, that is the strange mathematics of compassion. You give away what you think you cannot afford to lose, and somehow you receive something money could never purchase. I lost $18 that Thursday. I gained a job, a friendship, a renewed sense of dignity, and the knowledge that even when life strips away everything you thought you needed, you can still possess something powerful enough to change another person's world. Years later, Marin and I still visit that grocery store. The bench remains outside, though it has been replaced twice. Every time we pass it, we remember 2 strangers who were both struggling in different ways. One needed $18 to get home. The other needed a reason to believe that his own life wasn't finished. Neither of us knew that helping the other would become the beginning of a completely different life. So before this story ends, I want to ask you something. If you were carrying your last $18 and a stranger desperately needed it, would you give it away? And if someone once helped you when you had nothing left, what did that kindness teach you about life? Leave a meaningful comment and tell us what you believe, because your words might become the hope someone else needs today. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because sometimes kindness doesn't come back in the same form you gave it. Sometimes it comes back as a job when you thought you were finished, a friend when you felt completely alone, a second chance when you believed there were none left, or simply the courage to wake up tomorrow and try again. And sometimes, the last $18 you give away aren't the end of your story. They are the beginning.